You're listening to the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks.
Hi, I'm Dr. Brenna Hicks, the Kid Counselor. This is the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast, where I give you insight, awareness, and enlightenment about your parenting and your relationship with your kids. In today's episode, we are going to talk through an article that I found in the Tampa Bay Times that is entitled Say Less, Listen More. And this was actually from 1993, so we're going back in the archives here. Mickey Davis wrote this article, and I came across it in a random search for something else, and it was just so poignant and important, and I wanted to unpack it with you all. So I really think this is geared more toward preteens and teenagers, but I think universally this is true of interacting with kids as a whole as well. So if you are parents of teenagers, caregivers of teenagers, you have a teenager in your life that you love, this is specifically for you, but also in preparation for those who will have them soon. Our son is 12, so I'm putting myself in that category. And then also parents of younger children who eventually will become teens. But this really does apply to children of all ages, I feel. So the premise of this article was that we get it wrong when we interact with teenagers and why we do it and how we do it and what to do instead. So I want to go through those together today. And really, adolescence changes the dynamic in the family. And as teens become teenagers, they want to individuate, they want to become more independent and more responsible, and that ends up making parents feel devalued. And so when that happens, we often try to reach out for conversation to feel valued again. And unfortunately, we typically do that in an ineffective way. So the three things we're going to touch on together today. Really, the root of when we don't handle conversation well with teenagers is that we fear getting shut out. So that is often at the root of all conversational and communicational struggles, is that we fear getting shut out and then we respond and react in inappropriate ways. So we'll talk through that. Secondly, we have to stop asking questions. And we've talked about that many times in earlier episodes, specifically about putting children in their heads instead of their hearts. And if you are new to the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast family and you have no idea what I'm talking about, please go back in the archives and find the articles and the podcasts and the blogs that I've done on not asking questions to children. But we have to stop asking questions even with our teenagers. So we'll talk through that. And then finally, we forget and we don't give kids credit for their capabilities, for their responsibilities, and for what they can handle. So we have to be aware of that and careful with how we communicate about those things to our kids. So the path to calm, confident, and in control parenting starts now. All right, so typically what happens as we fear getting shut out, as our teenagers go into their rooms more, as they engage less, as they spend less time, as they want to be with their friends more, there's all of these scenarios that create this dynamic. We as adults in their lives, we fear getting left out, we fear getting shut out, we fear the frustration of feeling that we don't connect anymore. So what we do to combat that, which is not the best approach, but we typically start asking either rhetorical questions, ridiculous questions, inane questions, predictable questions, unthought out questions. And what I mean by that is we end up saying the same things again and again, asking the same questions with no thought, no intention, no purpose behind them. And that ends up being frustrating for us, for our teens, for everybody involved. And so, often you end up hearing that teenagers are frustrated with the way that parents talk to them, which is understandable considering you end up with parents who are asking these questions that teens feel very frustrated by. So here are some examples of questions that we would say. Have you done your homework? Is the friend you're riding with a good driver? How long has it been since you cleaned your room? Or when are you going to grow up? Why are you wearing that? what's making you so crabby? You end up with these types of questions, and you almost always end up with the same kind of answers. Yes, no, I don't know. One word non-answers is what I like to call them. So they are actually responding, but it's not particularly an answer. And so that's the dynamic that ends up getting created. We fear getting shut out. We fear getting left out. We crave connection. So we start asking these predictable, inane questions. And instead, what we can be doing is recognizing that kids hate getting grilled. They don't like feeling like they're being interrogated. They don't like feeling like they are given question after question after question in a grilling session. And it's much more helpful to give them specific, concrete questions. And the irony here, the article talks about this too, but the irony is I've already done an episode on this about when you are engaging with kids, the best way to get them to answer, since they are emotional, is to meet them in their emotions. And the way we do that is we give them a concrete, emotionally connected moment to discuss. So what we've talked about in earlier episodes, and I've even done, I think, a video about this. I think I've done a blog article about this. So there's some stuff I've already put out. But what ends up working is saying, tell me one thing that was funny in your day today. Tell me something that made you smile today. I wonder what one thing is that surprised you. And notice that the context of these are all emotionally driven. And we've talked about that you get a much more specific and thorough response from children because they are emotional, they're not cognitive. And questions put children in their heads and they live in their hearts. So that's why we try to avoid asking kids questions. Well, let's jump to adolescence, your teenager. They don't like getting questioned either for a different reason. They actually have abstract reasoning and they are more cognitive at this point, but they still don't like being asked tons of questions. So what we can do, use the same principle, a specific, concrete question. Tell me what happened at practice. I wonder what happened when your friends hung out today. What's one thing that happened? Notice that when you're very specific and concrete, you're much more likely to get more than a one-word answer. And so same principle applies. And the premise behind that approach is not, I still want information from my child. It's, I want to connect and I want them to be willing to share parts of their life with me. They're not going to give you a play-by-play of their whole day, but they will probably be willing to tell you one thing that happened at practice or something that was funny when they hung out with their friends. So it's a really important shift that we make where we're asking specific, concrete questions that are designed to connect and help us relate, not to elicit information and get a whole bunch of knowledge that we need. Okay, and then here's another piece of the puzzle here. Really, when there's miscommunication between parents and teens, it's really rooted in control. Parents fear losing control, and kids crave control. And so often, as parents fearing losing control, we try to govern and dictate everything that our teens do. And teens wanting to be independent and responsible are fighting for control. And so they don't want to have anyone lord over them. And there's where the conflict and the tension emerges. So we need to give teenagers more credit. We really need to recognize that they are more responsible than we often think. You know, one of the principles that we use at the center all the time, which is the main reason we don't ever speak about kids in front of kids, is because we always say kids are aware of way more than we give them credit for. And it's the same principle with teenagers. They're way more responsible than we give them credit for. And so we have to keep in mind that they want control and it can be given in appropriate doses. We don't have to fear of losing control. We have to give them the freedom that they have warranted and deserved. And so what that looks like is We have to make sure that we increase our empathy for their feelings, coupled with appropriate limits and boundaries that we are consistently able to follow through on. So let me say that again. We have to increase our empathy for our kids' feelings while making sure we have limits and boundaries that provide the consistent enforcement of those boundaries. Because basically, teens really just need to know where they stand in the family hierarchy, in the dynamic, in the relationship, in the context of the family unit. They need to know where they stand. They need to feel heard, but they need to know that parents will follow through. So it's really about acknowledging their feelings. And, let's go back to the 4 pillars. What is the very first pillar? Reflecting feelings. Why? Because kids need to feel heard, valued, validated, and understood. So we have to make sure that they feel that we have empathy for them, that we are connecting with them in their emotions, that we understand their feelings. They're not wrong for wanting to go out with their friends and not be with us. They're not wrong for wanting more independence. They're not wrong for trying to take more responsibility. That's a normal part of growing up and maturation. So none of those things are wrong. And they need to feel that we get that. However, there still needs to be follow through on limits and boundaries because they don't want complete freedom. They want more freedom in the context of the rules that they have to follow. And so it's a balance that needs to be found. So as we increase our empathy, we acknowledge their feelings. We also make sure we consistently follow through on the limits and boundaries that are necessary. And going back to an earlier rule of thumb, so in another episode, we talked about the rule of thumb, limits are only needed when they're needed. So the idea is not to say, this is the rule, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, here's everything you need to know about all the rules. That's overwhelming. They feel grilled, they feel attacked. What is necessary is to set limits when they're needed. So I trust you. I believe that you are capable. I believe that you are responsible. I believe that you can handle this until I need to set a limit. And so if a limit is needed, it 100% gets set. And we set appropriate boundaries at that time, but only when necessary. Because another episode I've done, another video I've done, another blog article I've written is believe in the inherent goodness of kids. Because the self-fulfilling prophecy, again, another episode, y'all, if you're new, you've got to go back and digest some of these earlier episodes. For those of my veterans that have been around forever, I hope that you're going, oh, right, I remember that. Okay, so I'm referencing all these earlier episodes and earlier topics because they all apply in this scenario. Self-fulfilling prophecy is, if you believe this about me, I become it. So if you believe that your children are snotty, if you believe that your children are disobedient, if you believe that your children are irresponsible, if you believe that your children are incompetent, they become those things. The Pygmalion effect, they've done studies on it. However, if you believe you are trustworthy, you are capable, you are good, you are obedient, they become those things too. And if at any moment they do not live up to those expectations, the limit gets put in place because it's necessary. But the bottom line is we have to make sure that we are not turning conversations into lectures, that we are not asking them questions, that we recognize this really is about us not wanting to get shut out and about us not wanting to lose control. And that we need to give them credit for the things that they can do and that they can be responsible for. Because if they walk away from an interaction with us, if our teenagers, if our preteens, if our adolescents walk away and the impression that they have is they feel affirmed and they feel heard. They say, you know what, mom, dad, loved one in my life just listened to me. That makes everything better. And the outcome on both ends for the parent and the teen is better. Because if all we do is turn conversations into lectures and ask them questions, there's frustration on both ends. So this Say Less, Listen More article was so closely aligned with the play therapy approach and all of the principles that we've already covered. I wanted to share it because I know a lot of times we focus on younger age children in this podcast because child-centered play therapy is best suited for children under 12. It can go up to 14, but 3 to 12 is the sweet spot. So a lot of these principles are for younger children, but they also apply for our teens. And we work with a lot of teens at the center, and we see this unfold with the older, like 12 to 16 range as well. So for those of you with teens coming into your world soon and or those that already have teens, this is really important. We do feel devalued. We do feel like we're losing control, getting shut out. But there are appropriate and healthy ways to manage that. And the bottom line is we have to have conversations and we have to help them feel heard and understood. And it has to be intentional. So I hope that this equips you with some ways to do that. So as always, please reach out to me, Brenna@thekidcounselor.com. I love hearing from you all. Thank you for those who have emailed and connected with me. If you haven't already, please subscribe. That really helps us get found when people are searching for parenting podcasts. And you can also sign up for my email newsletter at playtherapyparenting.com/newsletter. That's where you will always hear everything that's going on with me. And also playtherapyparenting.com is where you'll find all archived episodes. So if you're new and you want to catch up, you can find all of those there. I so appreciate you spending time with me each week, and we will talk again soon. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks. For more episodes and to subscribe to our newsletter, please go to www.playtherapyparenting.com.